I'm Stephen Usry, and we're joined today by Inman Majors. Thanks for dropping by, Inman.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Inman Majors teaches creative writing at James Madison University in Virginia, and he's a poet and a writer of fiction. He's previously published 2 books, Wonder Dog and Swimming in Sky, and he's just released his novel, The Millionaires, which is available from Norton. Inman, The Millionaires has a subtitle, A Novel of the New South. What does the phrase, the New South, mean to you?
First off, they added that subtitle. That's not my subtitle. So the book now doesn't have it on the front cover. It's on the inside cover. But I think that's the term New South is still kind of being defined. In my book, it's one of the main emphasis for writing this book was I'm really interested in my parents' generation. I'm 2 generations off the farm. And my parents lived in small towns, Huntland and Winchester, Tennessee. And then when they went off to college, they migrated to Knoxville, Tennessee, and Nashville, Tennessee. And so I was really interested in the generation of people that, were raised in small towns and were part of the big movement from a rural, agricultural South to the urban, suburban South that I think we live in today. And so my book is really concerned with these people that have one foot in the rural past and 1 foot in the urban, suburban future and present. So to me, this book, at least, is catching its late 70s, early 80s, right before the great Sunbelt migration. And the South is just about to change permanently, in good ways and in not so good ways, as far as, strip malls is not a good thing. And it just seemed like a really good time period to capture in that in-between state. So I guess I'm taking a long time to say I'm not sure what the New South is. I think it's still being defined.
And hopefully you help define it.
Well, I hope so, yeah.
Now, our main characters are the brothers Roland and J.T.
Mm-hmm.
Cole, as well as their advisor, Mike Teague.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Cole brothers are small-town boys who've come to Glenville,
Mm-hmm.
a fictional town in southeastern Tennessee,
Right.
To make their fortune.
Right.
What's their field, and how did they get involved in it?
They're bankers, and they've come, in the book, I said it's about a couple of things. The other thing it's about is ambition. And so I don't know that they're bankers because they love to be bankers. They are part of, again, that same generation who wanted to be thought of as modern and sophisticated and to say, my voice counts. And so how do I make my voice count? And for these guys to make it count, you got to have some cash in your pocket. And throughout the book, they run into this old guard. It's got the old money establishment who's, pretty stale. They're comfortable with Glenville being the same size it is, and they're comfortable with the status quo. And it suits them not to let anybody else in. And these guys are trying to get their foot in the door and say, well, maybe I want to help define what this city's like. And maybe I want to define what the future of this city and the South is also. And so their profession is just a way to help them achieve their goals, which is I count. I want to be at the big table too. I don't want to, because I was raised in a small town or on a farm, or because I didn't go to a fancy school, I still should have a say. So if there's an easier way for them to get a seat at the table, they would have done that. But banking to them seems like the easiest way to get a say in society.
But they did come to banking honestly. Their father had started a bank in their town.
That's right. Yeah. In the book, the guys talk about their dad had a store, and he never could get good farm loans. He had a farm, and he's a storekeeper, and the guys in town were very tight with their loans, and he started loaning money out of the store to people, and he was frustrated with how tight money was and how tough it was to start a new business or to ever get ahead. So that their father was a very altruistic guy, kind of the Jimmy Stewart character in A Wonderful Life, and that kind of got them their start. And so they in my book, it's obviously inspired by real people, the folks who brought the World's Fair to Knoxville, the Butcher Brothers, and I don't know. I always liked the Butcher Brothers, and I thought they did a lot of good things for Knoxville, and I don't know what their motives were or really what kind of guys they were. The guys in my book, though, are good guys and who want to do some things for the city their ambition gets them a little ahead of themselves. And so I think in the book, it's not this kind of premeditated thing that they're doing. It's just the danger of letting ambition go unchecked. And that chip on your shoulder, I think Southerners have a chip on their shoulder sometimes, and people who are newly moneyed have a chip on their shoulder, and they're saying, I'll show you, I'll prove to you, and it makes you overreach, it makes you overstride a bit. And that's how the guys in the book get in trouble. Now, I don't know how it happens in real life, but in my book, that's how it happens.
Well, there's an old saying that in a redneck bar, you know to run when you hear the phrase, "You think you're better than me?"
That's exactly right. And that attitude's healthy. It says I've got a sense of self, but it can also get you knifed or arrested, so the balancing about I'm not going to be pushed around is healthy, and having a sense of self-dignity is healthy, but you got to know when to pull back and turn it off and say, okay, I can't swing, I can't chase every windmill.
Well, all the main characters, including Teague, are morally compromised in one way or another, but I don't think anyone would call them evil.
No, I wouldn't. Well, it is a political novel, and if you're going to have a political novel, there's a few things you have to have. You have to have some philandering. Nobody wants to read a book about just guys talking politics and then going home and eating meatloaf with their family. I mean, that's boring. So you got to have a bit of carousing. I like reading about carousing. I like writing about carousing. So there's some of that in my novel, and there's some of that in every novel. And in a political novel, and in real politics, I spent 4 years reading virtually nothing but political biography. And so, I'm talking about Truman, Kennedy, FDR, Lincoln. You cannot be in politics without making some compromises and doing some things you don't want to do. And there's so much gray area that to write a political novel with people that aren't being challenged and to get where it's Machiavellian, the ends justify the means in some way, and some of it's just I won't succeed. I can't. If I want to do this big good thing, I may have to do these few other things that really I don't agree with, but I've got to do it. So I think that's what makes political novels interesting is the compromise. What line will you not cross? And when does it get easier and easier to say, well, rationalize it? Well, I normally want to do this, but we're doing so much good too that I'll go ahead and do that also. And I think it's easier to keep pushing that line, farther and farther away. And that's what's interesting about political novels, and also interesting about political biographies. All these people are very complicated people. There's no real people are like that. So I think my dad was a lobbyist for 40 years. So from the time I was 2 or 3 years old, I was around politicians. So very early on, I realized that politicians, you read about them in books, it's like FDR, JFK. They're these they're regular people. They're real people. And
do you remember any stories from when you were growing up that made it into the book?
I was trying to think. Last night I was in Nashville, and I got together. My dad passed away a couple years ago. I got together with a lot of his old lobbying buddies before my book signing. We met at a restaurant called Jimmy Kelly's Steakhouse. And there's a steakhouse in my book that looks a lot like I bartended there after grad school too. And when I told these guys, they're like going, "Do we have anything to worry about your book?" I was like, "You don't have anything to worry about." We've been talking politics and telling old stories and stuff. I go, "None of your stories are in there, but I couldn't have written the political banter if I hadn't spent 35 years hearing you guys talk." So just the way they talk, and there's a mix of politics and political gossip and social gossip and just this kind of a banter that these guys do, I think has an air of authenticity in the book. From spending, when I was a kid, 8 or 9 years old, my dad would take me out of school for a couple of days and let me come down and hang out at the state capitol. I had the legislature, so he was lobbying and doing stuff. I'd ride up and down the escalator to go to the Tennessee State Museum. One of the secretaries would let me use the coffee machines. That's when coffee machines were new. And then I go to lunch with them, and I go to dinner with them. And when I was in college at Vanderbilt, many a night Dad would call and say, "I'm taking Senator so-and-so to dinner. Would you like to tag along?" So I'd tag along. And they spoke, pretty freely in front of me. But none of their stories are in there. I'm trying to think if there are. Now, there's a lot of my stories about me growing up in there, and a lot of stories about my dad and his brothers growing up. My dad won 50 chicks in a rook tournament. I don't know if you remember that in the book. My dad used to move the the sawhorse on I-40 before it's completed and drive very fast down the interstate. So a lot of those kind of stories in there, the backstory stuff. Yeah.
Now, our political entree comes in when they decide Roland needs to run for governor.
Yeah.
So what do you think the impetus behind that decision was?
You know, that's not ever, and in the book, Teague wonders that, Teague is a political advisor, you know, and so I think he never quite gets a satisfactory answer in that book. I think it's just, you know, ego. It's not like he says, I want to solve the housing crisis. It's never fully, I wonder how many people run for office because they have a cause, and how many people run for office just because they want to be in the game. I think that in the book, at least, the guys just want to be in the game. That if you're a person who counts, you've got money and you're in politics, and then you're in the game.
And part of that game was their wanting to set up a World's Fair in Glenville, which we assume is Knoxville.
Influenced by Knoxville, yeah. I don't know if the run for governor they thought would help them get the World's Fair in my book. They're sort of separate deals. So once the World's Fair, once the governor's race isn't won, then they turn their attention to getting a World's Fair to a small city in Glenville that has in Tennessee that has no business hosting a world event, but somehow they pulled off.
Now, you mentioned the political advisor Teague, and his name's Mike Teague. Do you think there's some common trait that men who are called by their last name share, that even their wives refer to them by their last name?
You know, I tried to change that name towards the end. I don't know why. It just started hitting my ear wrong. And I think my brother and my editor's like, no, that's a good name. That's a good name. I don't know. I've got a few friends that their wives and everybody else call them names. There's a certain cool to it, don't you think?
But isn't there a certain remove as well that you really can't quite know that?
Well, that's a good analysis, because that's the thing about why does Teague get involved with these guys? He's a little more polished, a little more why there's a remove with Teague that there's some of these guys, they're very alive, they're very in the moment, they're very brave and daring, and I think there's something about them that makes Teague feel more alive. But that remove, that distance, is something that, to me, the book is more about Teague than it is about the brothers Cole and their wives. The wives, I think the wives are an interesting story in the book. But to me, the Teague, what's the attraction to these folks? Why can't Teague can never really fully engage. His dad has that scene where he calls him a lifelong free agent. And he's just really one of those people that, he's never going to join a club. He's not really going to be somebody that goes to the same church all the time. He's never going to have a big round, but he's always kind of moving. He's always there, but never fully there. So by the end of the book, he's going to have to decide to go all in and commit for once or not. And so that's one of the reasons we read the book and how that plays out at the end. I think he realized at the end that, you can't live a life separate from the rest of humanity. That you've got to be committed, and you've got to be involved, and you've got to be a part of something bigger than just yourself.
So a John Donne line gets thrown in there.
Exactly. Yeah, no man's no. That's right. Right.
Now, since we know that the Butcher brothers do pay a little bit of influence on the characters of Roland and JT, and we in Tennessee and probably northern Georgia understand what happened there and all the people that lost money. When you were waiting for your publication date to roll around and you see Citibank and Lehman and all these people, these banks going down, you go, wow, this is the right book for the right time.
Well, at first I was like, boy, you've got lucky timing, because I started 4 years ago when everybody was rolling in dough. And then I think, the good news is that I've got good timing. The bad news is everybody's going to be too broke to buy a book. So it is interesting. I think, people don't change. Ambition doesn't change. The desire for money doesn't change. So I think that was well timed. Back to the Butchers, who obviously were influenced. I didn't know anything about the Butchers really, except I have thought for a long time that everyone knows how it turned out, and the people who lost money, I'm sure, justifiably have feelings about this. But looking at it from someone who didn't lose money, I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it was a nice place to grow up, but it was a little sleepy. And then all of a sudden you start hearing about the Butchers. It's like, in 8th grade, I did my social studies project on, you could pick Lamar Alexander or Jake Butcher to back for governor. So for 2 months I cut out articles about Jake Butcher and did a little scrapbook and wrote a paper of why he should win, why we should vote for him. And then when the UA Bank, it was like the only time banks were hip. It's like, so I was like in 9th grade, I've got to move my money to UAB Bank. They were our celebrities, and there were a lot of people that didn't like them. And this is when they hadn't done it, before things went south. I think there was a lot of jealousy, frankly, with those guys. They were charming and charismatic, but they brought a lot of energy to Knoxville. And I think there's no doubt that they had some civic interest at heart. And there's no doubt that in my lifetime, they were the first people to say, why do we have to settle for being, sort of an overgrown college town? Why can't we be big time? Why can't we, let's get some stuff going. Let's start building some stuff. Let's have a World's Fair. Why not? And then everybody thought they were crazy. It's like Knoxville, Paris, New York, Knoxville, and just the, kind of the guts and the farsightedness to see that Knoxville could pull this off. And then we were so skeptical. I was skeptical that they could pull it off. And they pulled off, and for 6 months, we've got the London Symphony coming through town. We've got people from all over the world. 20 million people came. The World's Fair didn't lose money. I think there's this idea because things went down that it was a flop, like the New Orleans Fair, which was a flop. It broke even. Great publicity for the city. The downtown's nicer. They took this kind of bad area, and it's still nice down there. That's where they still got amphitheaters down there, and just for 6 months, the culture that came through Knoxville, Tennessee, New York City didn't have better culture than we had for 6 months. And so I've always thought that, the other side of the coin has not been talked about quite enough. It's been 25 years. It's time to start giving to say, well, yeah, we know the things that they pay. And they paid a heck of a price for it. I mean, a very, very heavy price for that. So I've always thought they never got their fair due for the good things they did do. And I don't think they did those things. I don't know, but just my personal opinion from just based on nothing is that they truly had Knoxville's best interest at heart in a lot of ways and did some good things for the city.
Well, let's turn back to our fictional brothers.
All right.
And that ambition and drive came from a small bit of sibling rivalry.
Right.
Talk about the filial relationship between JT and Roland.
Well, it's so funny to me that everybody who reads the book they read it and say, "You're doing you and your brother, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I have a younger brother who's my friend, as you know, is over here, and he will attest to this. He's a lot more polished than I am, and we're competitive, and we're best friends, and that sibling rivalry has been really healthy for us. And we're both really ambitious, and he's in business, and I'm in writing, and I've wondered for a long time, why are we ambitious? Were we raised that way, or was it an inborn trait? So that book is kind of the source of ambition. Where does it come from? I'm not sure the book ever satisfactorily answers it, but I think in part these two guys, because they each have and they each have the other one to push them, they both push harder and push farther. But that's probably one of my favorite things about the book is they are very good brothers to each other, despite their competitiveness. But those are some of my favorite scenes where you see them alone in these kind of private moments where you can just see that no one else quite gets them like they get each other. And I like watching the loyalty and the interaction and the kind of trash talking they do back to that's one of my favorite parts about the book.
Oh, your building's this tall, mine's going to be 3 stories taller.
Exactly. And that's me and my brother. We can't play cards, we can't play basketball, we can't do anything without trying to one-up each other. And another thing, I'll talk about real life a little bit more. When my brother and I are standing, as long as I've been alive, my brother, as relatives do, I think do it more in the South probably, if my brother and I well, he's just like his mom, and he's just like his dad, and they're complete opposites. And standing side by side, I think we do look pretty opposite. But put us in a room of 100, and we're the most alike of anyone in the room. And part of that's genetic, and part of that's, we were raised with the same parents in the same town, and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of interesting goes out, how can you be opposite and the most alike? And so I think that's That's the fun thing about a novel is you got all these ideas about this generation and the source of ambition and why are my brother and I the way we are and how do we get along. And you get in a novel, you get to play all those things out. Plot to me is the least interesting thing about a novel. I know I'm not supposed to say that. That's probably why John Grisham sells a lot more books than I do. The things I'm interested in writing are stylistically and conceptually and thematically and at a character level.
Well, and you do make some interesting choices. We have two elections in the book that we don't get to see happen.
Right.
And so, but we see the run-up, and
right.
I'm assuming Teague's influence on these run-up is what you're most interested in.
Yeah. I guess, I think a lot of political books, All the King's Men, I'm trying to think back, it's been a decade since I've read it, but most of the stuff you're seeing is the planning, the backroom stuff and the behind-the-scenes stuff, not the stuff that everybody would see on TV or read in the newspaper. You're seeing how do we strategize this? What kind of commercial do we make to counter what the opponent's doing? I hadn't thought about that both elections are off screen. I think I just wasn't interested in it. You just write. I don't really plan my books that much. I just kind of follow my books where they're going, and they always kind of surprise me. I don't know how they're going to end up. So, Nabokov said, who do you write for? What audience do you have in mind when you're writing? He goes, I write for the man I see in the mirror every morning when I'm shaving. And that's what I do. And hopefully some readers will like that too. But ultimately, if you're going to spend 4 years with a book, you've got to write what you like. What keeps you sitting at the typewriter for 2 or 3 hours a day.
Well, and what keeps a lot of men at the typewriter is women. And
nice segue.
We haven't talked much about the women in the book,
right.
And they are kind of secondary characters for the most part. But the one that does have the strongest presence is JT's wife, Corinne.
Yeah, she's good.
Talk about Corinne, her life and relationship with JT, who is just a handful.
Yeah, JT's a handful. She's a handful too. Corinne in the book, I had a very rough upbringing. Very poor, probably the most what we call country of the characters. And JT's her high school. They meet when they're see each other from they're 15 and 12 for the first time. And so, like a lot of folks of that generation, they got married too young. And if they were born today, they might say, well, maybe we should wait till 30 and realize, well, maybe we're not that well suited. So they love each other, they drive each other crazy. But Corinne, what I love about Corinne so much is she's stylish. She's smart, she's savvy, she's tough, she's got a great sense of self, but there's this part of her that is always wondering, is the country still showing? She's got a nice house, and she's got a good taste. She's not tacky, but I think there's a part of her that's constantly fighting for legitimacy and the sense of dignity she has no reason to feel dignified being raised poor and, not having gone to a fancy school and those sorts of, but she has this kind of inner dignity and she just won't be defeated. And I just like her spunk throughout. And
she has a lot of fire.
Yeah, she's fun. I knew so many women like that growing up, my generation, we were raised a lot by our moms. And we had a lot of my kids in high school. We're the kind of first generation with a lot of divorced parents, and those women had to be tough to kind of keep the house together. And my parents' generation is very interesting to me. That whole generation is really interesting to me. And this book is a way. The characters in my book are just representatives of that era. And that people, and it's a generation and the people that I really like. I hope it shows in the book, but I love the characters. All of them, no matter what they do, I like them a lot, except for the Republicans.
Did your wife ask you how you researched the infidelity in the book?
No, she didn't. But there are a few things in here. There's a couple of lines that Corinne has that she thinks sounds eerily familiar to things that she said to me. My wife's pretty spunky too, so no. Luckily, I got married when I was 32, so I
got a lot of worked out.
Well, there's some advantage to that. You have. When I got married, I was ready to get married, and take it seriously. And going out at night didn't have that much appeal to me anymore.
You mentioned that you hung out with some of the lobbyists that your father worked with. How do you think these political machinations may have changed over the past 25 years?
I think considerably. I know that the old timers, the guys my dad's age, say it's not as fun. I think they've got $25 they can spend on a legislator now. And back in the old days, it was unlimited. So it's not as freewheeling as it used to be. It's not as you've got the media now watching you. Any little slip up. It's a pretty loosey goosey time, I think, there until the last 15 years. I mean, it's probably, a good thing for the community, but maybe a little less fun. And I think there's fewer characters now. There's more. It's kind of like football coaches. Football coaches used to be a little bit more colorful and a little bit had more characters and spoke in unusual ways. They weren't these kind of corporate types that were all looked alike and never said a wrong, never made a mistake. And to me, they're boring. And I think the politicians are more boring and not quite as colorful. And most of the old timers will say it's not as fun up there, but that's probably good for the taxpayers' money. But I don't know. It seems like it's a less. I think there's more across the aisle stuff. The impression I get is friendlier. It's pretty, it's kind of a divided. This last speaker's race sounded pretty dicey. I don't think it's I don't think it's been a particularly fun place to be the last decade up there on the Hill. And especially that time period when you're speaking about the early 80s, that's when the Southern strategy for the Republicans really took hold and flipped the South for them. Right. Well, that may be some of it. My dad was a Democrat, so maybe maybe it's that the South is no longer Democratic, and so and you've got the more conservative folks are probably less likely to want to go out after the legislative session and go to a steakhouse and have a few drinks afterwards. So. Different strokes for different folks. You mentioned football coaches real quick there. Your uncle is Johnny Majors. Yes. What was it like growing up with an uncle who was a national championship coach? Well, it was cool. It was cool in more ways than not. I remember being a kid in the, third grade, and we came from Knoxville. This is my uncle at Pittsburgh, and so we got to ride on the team bus. And I lived in the suburbs, and it's pretty homogenous, and so this Pittsburgh team, the whole city of Pittsburgh is very diverse. You got, white folks, black folks, Italian folks. It's just so I get on this bus, and they're playing funky music, and they're like, "What's up, little?" I'm coming down the aisle, and they're like, "What's up, little man?" And it was like a land I've never seen before. Such a friendly, fun, laid back time. I got to stand on the sidelines. I got Tony Dorsett jersey, so it was cool. That was the cool part. Got to go to a lot of games. When we came back to Knoxville, there were times it wasn't so fun hearing disgruntled fans yell at your relatives. That got a little old, But that's just the game. That's if you're the coach and you're related to the coach. Being the coach not that bad. Being related to the coach is not as fun sometimes. But all in all, I loved it. Well, Inman, I'd like to thank you for stopping by today. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Stephen, good questions. Thanks for having me. The Millionaires by Inman Majors is available from Norton. I'm Stephen Ussery, and this is Book Talk.